The boy was horrified to discover that the pharmacist had mistakenly filled the medicine capsules with poison and was ordering him to deliver the drugs as soon as possible. This made George very uneasy. He glanced back at the old man immersed in the grief of losing his son and hesitated for a long time before deciding to risk being beaten and remind the boss.
Why didn't you deliver him right away? What kind of tricks you playing anyway?
George was terrified. With no other choice, he left temporarily with the medicine, but he didn't go to deliver it. Instead, he turned to his father's building and loan company, hoping to get some useful advice. However, his father was also in trouble at that time and had no time to pay attention to him. Time was ticking away. George couldn't wait any longer. He had to take the medicine back to the pharmacy and try to delay as long as possible, hoping the boss would calm down. Unfortunately, the patient's complaint call came in. When the boss learned that George hadn't delivered the medicine, he was furious. Without saying a word, he gave the boy a severe beating.
Mr. Gower, you don't know what you're doing. You put something wrong in those capsules.
Mr. Gower, half in doubt, snatched the medicine. It wasn't until he tasted some of the powder and carefully identified it that he realized how terribly wrong he had been. He immediately knelt down and begged the boy for forgiveness. It was George's insistence that had saved his life. Kind-hearted George chose to forgive and promised never to tell anyone about it. George's fine qualities won the favor of many girls in town. They would visit the store every day just to talk to him. However, in the years that followed, this kindness and sense of responsibility became a burden, pressing heavily on George's shoulders and almost driving him to despair. Even on that Christmas night more than a decade later, a time that should have been filled with gratitude and hope, George stood by a fast-flowing river and let out a soul-shaking question. If the world didn't have me in it, would it be better off? He gazed at the bottomless river and kept pondering this question. Looking back, George Bailey's life seemed trapped in the word failure. His career flopped, his life was in ruin. Who but himself remembered he'd once dreamed of conquering the world?
Wish I had $1 million. Hot dog!
George had a big dream when he was young, to become a millionaire and leave the small town to explore a broader world. However, fate always liked to play tricks on him, using a sense of responsibility to gradually erode his dreams. He still remembered when he was 12 years old. As the most courageous boy in the small town, he jumped into an ice hole without hesitation and rescued his younger brother who had fallen into the water. The price was that George got a severe cold, which led to an ear infection and the loss of hearing in his left ear. But this little hardship did not wear away George's ambition and dreams.
I want a big one! Italy and Baghdad, Samarkand, great big set, but
10 years passed, and he always remembered and prepared to take risks in a broader world. Listening to George's description, the shopkeeper took out a large suitcase that met his requirements with a smile and said that it was a surprise prepared for him by Mr. Gower. It turned out that not only George remembered his dream, but also everyone who had been helped by him was keeping his dream in mind and trying to contribute. George went home happily with the trunk. After attending his brother's high school graduation party that night, he was going to set off on an adventure. At the dinner table, the father looked at his son's joyful expression and, after a long silence, still expressed his wish for George to stay and take over the loan company. Only a young man with a sense of responsibility like George could lead the townspeople to a better life with their own houses. But George flatly refused his father's proposal. He didn't want to spend his whole life, like his father, on trivial matters such as figuring out how to save 3 cents on a pipe. He wanted to leave the small town and make a big difference. This caused a rift between father and son. Little did they know, fate had already made arrangements for the future. At his brother Harry's graduation party, George met a girl named Mary, whom he had had a crush on since childhood. It took just one glance and he was smitten. His feet seemed to move on their own, heading straight for the girl he had a crush on. It was as if his world now only had this one person in it. He boldly put his arm around her waist and danced with her in the crowd to the music, completely ignoring the resentful looks from the boy whose date he had taken. So, egged on by his friends, the boy decided to get back at him. He took the key that would open the door to revenge, inserted it into the lock beside him and gently turned it. Soon, the floor in the middle of the dance floor split open, slowly revealing the swimming pool directly below. The two, immersed in their reunion, didn't notice the changes around them and continued to dance passionately. George and Mary fell into the water, but they didn't stop dancing. The originally frightened crowd was soon infected and also jumped into the pool, continuing to show the passion and vitality of youth. The bright moonlight shone on the road where the boy sent the girl home, leaving ambiguous shadows. They laughed, played and sang. Love was taking root and sprouting.
What is it you want, Mary? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
I'll take it. Then what?
And then the unsentimental young man squatted down, picked up a stone, and smashed it at the window glass of a nearby abandoned apartment. Legend has it that as long as you can hit the glass of the second-floor window of this apartment, your wish will come true. Mary also followed George's example, picked up a stone and threw it. Just as George was chasing Mary to ask what her wish was, the neighbor who had witnessed everything finally had enough.
Why don't you kiss her instead of talking her to death?
How's that?
Oh, you just wasted on the wrong people.
Hearing the neighbors teasing, Mary was so shy that she wanted to run away, but her dress got caught on George's foot and the whole robe was pulled off. Mary had to hide in the hydrangea bushes and didn't dare to show her head. When George realized it and wanted to tease the girl he liked, he saw his uncle driving a car rushing towards him. His father had a heart attack. George left everything behind and rushed over, but in the end, he still didn't get to see his father for the last time. The unexpected event disrupted George's plans. He had to give up his adventure and take over his father's job to manage the company's affairs for 3 months. Today was supposed to be the day George was going to report to college, but once again, a strong sense of responsibility kept him from leaving. The greedy Mr. Potter took this opportunity to propose dissolving the business because George's father had provided low-interest building loans to the poor in the town, which seriously affected his apartment rental rate. Henry Potter was the richest and most evil man in town. He was profit-driven and hardly considered the poor as human beings. He thought they deserved to live in dirty, messy and poor apartments, rather than having their own houses to enjoy life. Potter's remarks aroused George's aversion. In his view, everyone had the right to pursue the life they wanted.
People were human beings to him, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle.
George, they voted Potter down. They want to keep it going. They've appointed George here as executive secretary to take his father's place.
George was in a dilemma. How should he choose between his dream and his responsibility? It wasn't until he returned to the conference room and saw Mr. Potter's sly smile that George finally made up his mind. He decided to stay in the town and lead everyone to a better tomorrow. And he gave all the tuition he had saved over the years to his brother Harry to send him to college. As long as he waited for 4 more years, until his brother came back with a degree and took over the Building and Loan Association, he would be completely free. However, George's plan fell through once again. Harry got married, and his father-in-law wanted him to stay in his glass factory to do research work, which was a very promising job.
You've been holding the bag here for 4 years, and, well, I won't let you down, George.
Harry's promise didn't ease George's mood. Once again, he fell into deep thought. Which was more important, his brother's future or his own dream? Looking at the travel guide in his hand, George felt extremely frustrated. Before he knew it, he had walked all the way to Mary's house. To this day, Mary still loved George as she did in her childhood and even bluntly said that she wanted to marry him. But George, who had achieved nothing, didn't dare to think about getting married. He still hadn't given up his dream of exploring the world. George made up his mind to say goodbye, but seeing the girl he loved with tears in her eyes, he still couldn't bear to give her up. Thus, weighed down by both his brother and Mary, George's dream eventually became the one that was sacrificed. After marrying Mary, George continued to work at the Building and Loan Association, earning a meager salary of only $45 a week and living a poor life with his beloved. The only comfort for him was probably the growth and development of Bailey Park, where more and more poor people built houses and had their own homes to shelter from the wind and rain. It also meant that the cunning businessman Potter's apartments couldn't be rented out. So, this sly merchant came up with a brilliant idea.
George, I'll start you out at $20,000 a year.
$20,000 a year?
I'm offering you a 3-year contract at $20,000 a year starting today.
For a young man who had longed to leave the small town and explore the world since he was a child, such an offer was really very tempting, and George was no exception. He inevitably thought of his childhood friend Sam, who was the same age. With the support of his parents, Sam had completed his university education in New York early and founded his own plastic factory, achieving financial freedom. While he himself due to various pressures of reality, had missed one opportunity after another to rise and was still stuck in the small town he had wanted to leave since he was a child, accomplishing nothing. Almost no one can avoid comparing themselves with others, and George was no exception. He couldn't help but feel unbalanced. So, when faced with the tempting offer from Mr. Potter, he was tempted. However, just as the two of them were about to shake hands, George suddenly realized that this was a dirty deal. He couldn't sacrifice the interests of all the poor people in the town for his own selfish desires. But when he got home and looked at the dilapidated house, George felt guilty. As a husband, he couldn't provide a good life for his wife.
Why in the world did you ever marry a guy like me?
I want my baby to look like you.
Didn't even have a honeymoon. Your what?
My baby.
For Mary, the fine qualities that George possessed were something that couldn't be measured by money. His value to everyone was far beyond his own imagination. As the children were born, leaving the small town to have an adventure gradually became an unattainable dream for George. However, fate still had more blows in store for him. World War II broke out in full swing, and the lives of the townspeople changed in many ways. Sam made another fortune by supplying plane windshields. Mr. Gower also made some money by selling war bonds. George's policeman friend received the Silver Star. His brother Harry was even more impressive. He became a Navy pilot, not only shooting down 15 planes but also rescuing a troop transport full of soldiers. Even the cunning businessman Mr. Potter joined the board of directors as he wished, with more wealth and power. The only one left was George, who was rejected for military service due to his deafness in the left ear and stayed in the small town, doing insignificant things, which made him feel extremely frustrated. It wasn't until Christmas 1945 that George finally got some good news. His brother Harry, because of his outstanding war achievements, was awarded the Congressional Medal by the president himself. George was proud and shared his brother's good news with everyone. Uncle Billy was also very happy. But he didn't forget that it was the day for the bank examiner to check the accounts. He had to deposit the company's money into the bank account before the bank closed. As he was filling out the form, the cunning businessman Potter, who had always been against them, came in. He had already taken over the bank. Spotting Potter's newspaper, Billy, caught up in pride, gloated. However, it was this provocative act that almost cost George his life. Uncle Billy didn't notice at all that he had wrapped the $8,000 that was supposed to be deposited into the bank in the newspaper and given it to Potter. It wasn't until the bank teller reminded him that Uncle Billy realized the money was gone. He was frantic. He searched through all his pockets and the bank's trash cans but couldn't find the money. After finding the money, Potter didn't choose to return it. Instead, he hid it away as soon as possible and watched the joke from behind the door. This time, he was sure he could finally defeat that annoying guy George, who had been blocking his way to wealth.
Where's that money, you silly, stupid old fool? Where's that money?
George's uncle had lost $8,000 from the company due to a foolish mistake. They searched every possible place, even turned over the snow on the road several times, but still couldn't find the money. What's worse, the bank's auditor was waiting at the company to check the accounts. All sorts of negative thoughts filled George's mind at that moment: bankruptcy, scandal, imprisonment. He could almost foresee his own end. What should have been a hopeful Christmas Eve, George was plunged into deep despair. He staggered to a fast-flowing river, gazing at the bottomless water, and a terrible thought came to his mind. If I were to disappear from this world, would everything be better? While he was looking around, not wanting to cause trouble for others, there was a sudden loud splash on the water surface, followed by urgent cries for help. Without hesitation, George immediately jumped into the freezing river to save someone. The old man who had fallen into the water claimed to be George's guardian angel. The purpose of his falling was to save George and encourage him to value the meaning of being alive. More importantly, God had promised him that if he could successfully save George, he would be promoted from a second-class angel to a great angel. Listening to the old man's increasingly absurd words, another good-hearted person who participated in the rescue thought he had encountered a madman and was scared away. George began to suspect that he had drunk fake alcohol, leading to hallucinations. No matter how eloquently the old man spoke, the man who was desperate about life still thought that his death would be more valuable than his life, and the people related to him would live happier. Just thinking about the frightened and scared looks of his children at home just now, and the sad eyes of his wife Mary, George felt more and more that he probably shouldn't have been born in the first place. George's self-abandoning words gave the old man a new inspiration. After a moment of deep thought, he agreed to help George fulfill his just-made wish.
You've got your wish. You've never been bored.
As soon as the words fell, a strong wind blew outside. George was surprised to find that the bleeding wound at the corner of his mouth had strangely disappeared, and his hearing in the left ear had also been restored. Could it be that there really are angels in this world? With a skeptical attitude, George followed the man who claimed to be an angel and set off. They were going to see if the world without him had become better. Walking along, George soon found something was wrong. It was too prosperous here. The streets were full of red wine and green lights, and almost all of them were the properties of the unscrupulous businessman Potter. How could this be?
That Bailey's a liar! I know every big shot in this town! I know Potter and
Hey! The Bailey building alone was up there!
They went out of business years ago.
George couldn't believe what he saw and heard, but he still insisted that it was an illusion caused by drinking fake alcohol, so he decided to go to the bar where he had just drunk to find the answer. When he squeezed into the crowded crowd of the bar with the old man and found an empty seat at the bar, George saw that the person ordering was familiar Nick. He became even more convinced that everything just now was an illusion. However, this Nick acted very coldly, as if he didn't know him at all. At first, George could still force a smile, but soon, he couldn't smile anymore, because he saw Mr. Gower, who should have been a successful man, walking into the bar like a destitute vagrant, with a body full of wind and frost. Under the mocking gaze of everyone, he humbly begged the bar owner to give him a drink, only to be driven out ruthlessly. It was as if he had been struck by lightning.
Nick, isn't that Mr. Gower, the druggist?
20 years in jail for poisoning a kid. If you know him, you must be a jailbird yourself.
George couldn't believe it. Didn't he prevent this tragedy from happening? They were soon thrown out of the bar as troublemakers and lay on the cold snow. George felt that he couldn't think. Countless questions interwove and impacted his brain, leaving it in chaos. Why did everything change? George remembered that the person who caused all these changes was this strange old man who suddenly appeared in his life. Who on earth is he? What's his purpose? He poked the old man's chest hard, trying to find some evidence.
You a hypnotist?
No, of course not.
Well, then why am I seeing all these strange things?
I told you, George, I'm your guardian angel.
Yeah, I know. You told me that.
Then the old man took him to a place. It should have been the Bailey Park full of lights and laughter, a paradise built by the poor with low-interest loans from George's family's housing loan company. But now it was dead silent. What broke his heart even more was that George saw his brother Harry's grave here. He trembled as he reached out and brushed away the thick snow. The tombstone clearly showed the time of his death. Because there was no George Bailey in this world. In the winter of 1919, Harry drowned after falling into that ice hole. All the glory that George remembered about his brother Harry was gone. He didn't become a pilot, didn't save a ship of soldiers, and didn't receive the Congressional Medal of Honor from the president. This is the world without George Bailey. It's too terrible. George immediately rushed back to the home he shared with Mary, desperate to check on her and the children. But the warm, lively house he remembered was now pitch black, with cobwebs covering every corner. There wasn't a trace of anyone. George searched frantically, calling out desperately again and again, but no one responded. No beloved Mary, and no adorable children.
I don't know how you know these things, but tell me, where is she? If you know where she is, tell me where my wife is. Please, Clarence, tell me where she is.
You're not gonna like it, George.
Where is she? Where is Mary? Where is she? Where is she?
Clarence couldn't bear George's pleading and took him to see Mary, who hadn't married him. But the result was a shock to everyone. Mary without George didn't live well either. She became an old maid, working in a library. George's heart shattered. In a daze, he remembered the question he had asked Mary before. Why did you choose to marry me instead of the richer Sam or someone else in town? Mary's answer was, I want my children to look like you. Indeed, what moved Mary was never money, but responsibility and commitment. George was the best person to marry in this town, and no one could replace his position in Mary's heart. Snapping out of his memories, George rushed up to Mary to recognize her. Unfortunately, Mary in this world didn't know any George. She was scared and screamed at the strange man who suddenly appeared and entangled her. George truly felt the pain of the heart, which was more than 100 times more painful than owing the bank $8,000. It turned out that being forgotten by the loved one was the real despair. George regretted it. He wanted to go back to the original world where he existed. However, Clarence was gone. He went crazy, pushed open the crowd, ran all the way to the river where he met Clarence, and begged him to change him back.
Clarence! Clarence! Help me, Clarence! Get me back to my wife and kids! Help me, Clarence, please!
The sky started to snow heavily again. Before George could react, the mistake just now was corrected again, and time went back to before he wanted to jump into the river. His good friend drove a taxi and found him. He had been looking for him for almost the whole night and finally found him. George hugged his friend excitedly. He was extremely grateful and missed the feeling of being remembered. It's a wonderful life. George ran all the way, greeting everyone he met and sending them the most sincere Christmas greetings. Even the most hated Mr. Potter didn't miss out. Finally, he returned to the shabby but extremely warm home he and Mary had built together. Then he ran upstairs and tightly hugged his children who had been waiting for Christmas.
George, darling, where are you? Oh, George. Come on in here now.
The townspeople also poured in, bringing the money they had raised bit by bit to help George through this difficult time. Seeing George's stunned expression, Uncle Billy told him the truth. It was all Mary's idea. From the moment she knew he was in trouble, she immediately took action. The townspeople didn't ask anything. They just said that if George had trouble, count me in. Love given came back tenfold. All the people George had ever helped reached out to him, including his old friend Sam from London, who, upon receiving George's telegram about his trouble, immediately sent $25,000. Amidst the festive scene, George spotted a copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. It was left by Clarence. On the flyleaf was a message from Clarence to George. Remember, no man is a failure who has friends. Just then, the Christmas tree's wind chime rang out. A new second-class angel had earned his wings and ascended to become a great angel.
I owe everything to George Bailey. Help him, dear Father.
Jesus and Mary, help my friend, Mr. Bailey.
George is a good guy. Give him a break, God.
Please, God. Something's the matter with Daddy.
George Bailey. Yes, tonight's his crucial night, you're right. Joseph, send for Clarence. That man will be thinking seriously of throwing away God's greatest gift.